Their exact words were, "I have PTSD" from the company that they use. So they wanted to make sure that when we were talking about the types of people that they would need at their plant, that they were in fact going to be able to do what they needed them to do.
And one of the things that we really love to see is when the client becomes comfortable through demonstrated behavior and capability that they actually, in many cases, let us go in and run the facility on the weekends or off shift because we've built that level of trust with them.
Welcome back to American Made, the show where we discuss labor issues impacting manufacturers today. I'm Michele Vincent, Vice President of Maddie Corp.
And I'm Joel Zimmerman, President and CEO of Maddie Corp.
And today we're going to be talking about contract labor and whether or not that is a dirty word. I think it used to be. Maybe it still is. It depends on the situation. What do you think?
I think that it depends what type of contract labor people envision. So most people, when they think of temporary personnel, think of a temp agency, which identifies someone from within their database so that they recruited, tends to be a local person, and they send them to the plant, and then the client ends up having to manage them and deal with it. The other version of that is much more structured, where you don't increase the burden on your management team by adding 50 or 100 strangers that are paid by a temp agency with no real connection to you being the client or the temp agency. And the first version can be a dirty work and a negative result because it frequently doesn't solve the problem rapidly and it increases pressure on your people. The other end of that spectrum is a very structured, service-based staffing response, which comes with its own supervision. So you don't have to have 100 new friends. You go to one person, and that person then directs the temp agency's employees to where to go, what to do, how to do it. And they also deal with any kind of administrative issues or disciplinary problems. So that version is not a negative. That version is a strong positive because the client's personnel feel immediate relief. They feel valued because the company made an investment in them by hiring a professional service. So I think, it depends on what your perspective is and what your end goal is.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, when we think about contract labor, you know, where we sit now is very different from 20, 30 years ago when people used to go into work and stay with their employer for 30 years until they retire, right? People now move around more frequently. We have the whole gig economy where people can kind of pick up jobs and it's not as frowned upon as it used to be. And I came across some more information recently. I dug it up specifically for today's episode. So Chris Dwyer from Ardent Partners has some statistics and information on the contingent workforce. So the modern workforce is typically or around 50% contingent or extended, so not full-time employees. So that's a lot. That obviously it depends on the organization, but that's a big deal. So I think, again, it depends, but it can be very strategic for a company to use contract labor, and it can be very beneficial. But I think, everything you just said is accurate, right? Are you bringing in people who are, I don't want to say causing problems, but a little bit more challenging to deal with, or are you bringing in people in a service that are, highly skilled, very focused? Those are two different things. I think sometimes when business leaders are thinking about bringing in contractors, obviously it depends a little bit on the environment that you're bringing people into, but there may be some concerns about training and, how comfortable they might be in the environment, which does kind of go back to what you were just saying a little bit about the types of people that you're bringing in. But what would you say is the big difference between bringing in highly experienced contractors into a manufacturing environment as opposed to bringing in maybe, something I hear from companies all the time is, they'll bring in sort of entry level production workers. Oftentimes, these are people who may not have worked in manufacturing environments before, right? And even if we're not, I was talking about bringing in highly skilled. So I don't just mean maintenance techs, machinists, people like those types of skills, but you can bring in highly skilled production operators who, have worked across different environments. So, what concerns, if any, are there related to training those types of personnel, would you say?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the safety aspect. So, more experienced people, even those who've worked at multiple companies outside of the temporary work sphere, have a lot of safety experience that they've accumulated in different facilities with different safety um, nuances, as opposed to an inexperienced person who completely unknowingly could hurt themselves, hurt others, or damage equipment in the plant. So that's one of the biggest risks right there. Is you bring in seasoned people, you tend not to have avoidable mistakes.
When we're bringing in contractors into the plant, a question that I get asked sometimes is, if we provide training. And sometimes I think they're a little bit shocked when I say we don't provide our own training. Why is that?
Well, the primary reason for that is you want to have a uniform level of training that's specific to the plant. So what we always promote to the client is our people are very experienced at coming in with a lot of background, but they've never worked here before. And for the comfort level of your own staff as well as ours, we strongly recommend that you put them through the exact same orientation and safety training that you do with your own personnel. That way, everybody's working off the same playbook, and it builds confidence amongst your personnel because they know there are people that are experienced and now familiar with our facility and our practices.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of aligns with bringing in experienced people, even if they have experience on similar or the exact type of machine. There's still sort of an acclimation and training period, no matter how experienced they are, right? Because one machine can be very different from another machine, and there's little things, intricacies that can happen that you have to kind of learn and be mindful of. And so that takes a little bit of training, right? Once you get to a plant, even with the most experienced type of personnel.
It does, but it also requires a certain mindset. So, personnel that we really favor are those who are very curious and they want to expand their experience and knowledge base. So, they really put in the time to learn as much as they can about the nuances within a facility, even if it's the same machine they worked at a prior project. They want to keep accumulating that knowledge, and that helps get them acclimated very quickly and increase their value from a support standpoint. And one of the things that we really love to see is when the client becomes comfortable through demonstrated behavior and capability that they actually, in many cases, let us go in and run the facility on the weekends or off shift because we've built that level of trust with them based upon the skill set of the personnel that are there.
How do you measure quality and rework for contractors?
My opinion about that is that the contractor should be held to the same standard as the existing workforce from a quality, productivity, and a scrap perspective. Not on day one and maybe not for the first week or two, but if they're truly skilled, they need to acclimate to the uniqueness of a particular facility, but within a relatively short period of time, they should be producing high quality parts or products. That's what they're there for. It is a service, and the expectation should be that after we give you time to settle in, if you will, you should be producing at a level which is at least approaching what our employees do from a quality and productivity standpoint. And in some cases, and one of the things that I know you'll remember from past client comments is not only how surprised were they by the productivity from the temporary personnel, it also enabled them to reset their expectations on their own workforce from a, a flow and a productivity standpoint. So they are pleasantly surprised in some cases if the right personnel go in, you get the results you want, but you also learn about your facility at the same time. And I guess the strongest evidence of the success of that is when they want to hire our personnel permanently.
It is great when our clients wanna hire our people, obviously, we're sending them the right people and not just with the skill set, but, with the right attitude that they'd wanna bring them into their organization. Even for companies that are skeptical at first, I would say more often than not, when we go into a facility, they'll say, "We might need you for 3 or 4 months." And once they get that talent in place and they get used to it, they don't wanna let them go. So, they end up keeping us a lot longer usually. It obviously depends on the circumstance for which we're being brought into a facility, um but that said, it is unfortunate, and it can be a dirty word too, in the sense that there are, unfortunately, people who do have very bad experiences. I spoke to someone recently, their exact words were, "I have PTSD" from from the company that they use. So they wanted to make sure that when we were talking about the types of people that they would need at their plant, that they were in fact going to be able to do what they needed them to do. In that case, it was some programming. And so unfortunately for them, their first experience with travel labor was not what they expected and, didn't result in a good experience for them. So I think in that case, it's a dirty word. Overall, um, it's definitely more acceptable today and can be used very strategically to achieve business objectives, increasing production or taking on new customers, whatever it may be.
The source of the personnel obviously has a strong impact because there's a quality control aspect into identifying personnel, properly vetting them, and then providing them to the end user. But when it's done well, there's a lot of benefit to it because it provides you the flexibility to grow and shrink the workforce in response to ebbs and flows in demand, right? And it also, if you have a seasonal situation, which some of our clients have turned to us for, it allows you to have a full workforce for 8 or 9 months a year and not take on the burden of a 12-month employee with all of the benefits and other attributes of employment at that entity. So it gives them the ability to flex it. And especially if you get a lot of returning personnel year over year with that seasonal need, you can develop relationships, friendships, most importantly, the acclimated personnel who understand the role, they understand how the machinery works in the facility, and they literally step back in next year, spend their 8 or 9 months there, and then depart. So it's a dirty word if it's executed poorly and it adds to the problems in rather than reducing them. If it does reduce them and it also comes with flexibility and potentially the assistance with training your permanent hires, if they start to go in that direction, it's the exact opposite of a dirty word. It's a godsend in many cases.
What is the single best sign that a contractor will succeed at your site?
I'm going to answer that as if I was speaking about our own viewpoint on that track record. So if an employee or candidate to go to a client site has a demonstrated project history within a similar area of responsibility, especially with one vendor, ideally the vendor that's providing the person to the client, that's a very strong indication that the company you've hired to provide the personnel knows them, has developed and earned a good relationship with them, and understands what their history is. That coupled with guarantees around that puts some skin in the game for the staffing entity, because if the person isn't performing as advertised, there's a cost associated with that. So if the person has a good track record and they consistently show up on time and they remain curious and they want to absorb information and learn, but especially coupled with that track record, that's the best indication that you're going to have someone who sticks in the job.
So wrapping everything up, I think a key takeaway here is that overall, contract labor is not really a dirty word in the sense that it's more acceptable. Employers today typically have a large portion of their employees are contingent workers, but it still can be when a company has a bad experience. You have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add to that, it's like anything else. There are good actors and bad actors out there, and there are some people who are better at what they do than others and more passionate about it. So If you've selected the right vendor, it's not going to be a negative experience. If you don't select the right vendor, you might not get the results you want. You might increase your problems. So, my advice to those out there is do your homework, check your references, and don't assume.
Don't assume. Love it. If you're taking on a new customer or just need to increase production very quickly, you need a crew on site fast. We can help you with that. We have fully vetted, highly skilled labor available, as well as lower skilled production labor. If you're looking for a quote, visit maddiecorp.com. All right, so let's jump into our news commentary. We have an article here from OSHA stating that staffing agencies and host employers are jointly responsible for safe work environments for temporary workers. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting topic. Um, they are definitely joint employers from that perspective, and the liability goes in both directions if there's an incident. And one of the things mentioned in the article is that OSHA is actually very concerned that the use of temporary employees is done intentionally to avoid meeting some of their compliance obligations. I don't think it's really an intentional thing. I think it's often overlooked. And they assume that the people coming from the temp agency are going to be safe within the facility. Maybe they don't even ask the question. It's one of the reasons having uniform training, both for your temporary and permanent employees, is critical because if there is a problem, it creates a financial liability. OSHA will fine both the temp agency and the client, and it creates a very negative morale impact on the facility as a whole if people um, are aware that an injury, a severe injury, has occurred. So I think the concern from OSHA is valid, and I think it's very important for both the client and the staffing entity to be aligned on maintaining a safe environment, both for the temps and for the permanents, because they're all doing the same thing at the same time in the same place. So they should all be held to the same standard and provided the same training to make sure that everyone is just as safe as the person next to them.
Is there anything special you think that is needed in the case where maybe temps are coming into that type of environment if they've never worked in that type of environment before?
That would be rather egregious if you took someone who's never been in an industrial environment and did not disclose that. It depends what the client's asking for. The expectation is they know where to stand and where not to stand, and when to push a button and when not to push a button, and when to raise their hand and ask for help. And you only get that you can't really train that as fully as someone who's lived it and been in there and they've seen what can happen if you don't do things the right way. So I think a lot of people are looking for a quick fix when they go to a temporary solution. They don't always make sure that the underlying foundation of those of the entity bringing those personnel in is going to match the expectations of the workforce and the company in general. And if all goes well, everything was great, and it was easy. If one thing goes wrong, you're going to have visits from OSHA, you're going to have visits from the state, you're going to be in the news, and it's all negative.
When does contract labor actually reduce risk for companies?
Contract labor reduces risk if the company is in jeopardy of losing a client, negatively impacting a relationship with a customer, rather, or if there's a serious threat to market share due to lack of productivity. And on a more human level, uh, it enables them to not overwork their existing valued employees who may start to look for other employment opportunities if they feel that they're being pushed beyond what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, I do hear that a lot in terms of, existing full-time employees being overworked, concern about that creating turnover. And turnover on the production floor is difficult, and it's also very difficult if that overtime is at the supervision level and the management level. Um, and so both of those are big risks for companies. If you found this episode useful, head over to Spotify, search for American Made, and leave us a rating. All right, now we're back with Love It or Hate It. All right, here we go. National sourcing is always better than relying on local temp agencies.
Surprisingly, I'm going to go with hate it.
I'm going to love it. Why do you hate it?
Obviously, I'm a little biased towards national sourcing, but the simple fact is if they can find really skilled personnel that show up locally, it's much less involved with that. And more importantly, to the client, you have a much higher probability of converting that person to a permanent hire because they're from the local area. So if you can go that route, that is actually what we recommend that you do.
That is true, and I do tell people that, so I probably should have agreed with you on that. But I'm gonna say that I love it because I think that in the labor market today, it's really hard. If you need highly skilled people and you need them fast, or you need a large amounts of workers, even if it's not really fast, that can be very, very tricky. And the easiest way to do that is to just source them nationally.
I agree with that, obviously. Smaller is easier to do locally. If you need something done big, you need to go to a service entity, not just a temp provider.
All right, next one. Contract labor should be used as a strategic lever and not a last minute stopgap.
Want to know why I love it?
I do.
Properly executed, it is a very important strategic lever because it allows the flexibility we've spoken about in previous episodes, and it gives a immediate or relatively immediate response resource to the company. But to do it well, you have to have a relationship. It's not something you grab an entity or an agency and tell them what you want. You should have an ongoing relationship so they know what your expectations are, what your needs are, and they will react quickly because you're a known entity with a consistent. Doesn't even mean you have to have people deployed every time, but you have to have an ongoing year-over-year relationship with the staffing agency, service provider, so they can respond quickly. And once you have that relationship, that is how you have those resources available. If you're starting from scratch with a new entity, you're not the primary client. You're the new client, right? And they're going to be filling their existing contracts with personnel and may not have the resources available. Once that relationship exists, you have to have a readiness capability for all of your clientele. And that's the commitment that the company should look for from their staffing agency and in a demonstrable way.
I think, I dislike it just on the fact that, yes, it should be a strategic lever, but companies run into situations unexpectedly, and they do need a last minute stopgap. And so, is it ideal to have a relationship with them beforehand? Yes. But if they have the experience to, get you what you need very quickly, I think that's a good thing. I think, and today's world, it's crazy. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. And sometimes you're put into a situation that you just didn't expect and you need to have a solution for it.
It's very true, but touching back on the relationship and the entity providing the service, that is a function of where they're coming from in space and time. So if you're, part of the reason we got out of the labor dispute business is because of the uncertainty surrounding it, but also the low expectations from a quality standpoint and a different feed of personnel. So when you're not dealing with a labor dispute, you can provide more stability and more reality to them that this is going to happen. It's not a contingency. So everything gets ramped up depending upon the mindset of the individuals applying it. So if your expectation is we're going to staff this like we staff a strike, you're going to get a different group of people and you're going to get a different result. And you're also going to create potential friction. So it should be a last minute implementable stopgap, but the best way to do it is to have a relationship outside of a labor dispute. So when you have a non-labor dispute need pop up, you've already got a partner that knows you and is trustworthy.
All right, one more. Contract crews should wear distinct PPE colors or shirts.
I love it.
I'm gonna I'm gonna hate it. I only say that because, and I should preface this by saying we often wear our own Maddie shirts into our employers' environments. But I think maybe from the standpoint of feeling like you're part of the team and you're not an outsider, it could potentially make you feel or create a more inclusive environment where you feel like you are part of their team as opposed to part of the agency's team.
Okay, I see your point. From my perspective, I think that they should wear distinctive clothing for a couple of reasons. One, especially at the beginning, everybody knows who the new people are, right? And if there's a concern about safety, they know who to keep their eyes on. When you're looking out at the plant floor and you see 500 people arrayed around there, you can pick out who they're from. From my own personal bias, I'm very confident about the personnel we put in. So I actually require them, unless the client has an objection to it, to wear Matty attire in the facility because I want the client and the client's customers when they visit to see who's doing the work, right? And though there is an issue of immersing yourself amongst the workforce of the client, we're always still going to be the temp. Unless you take a permanent job, you're still going to be one of them, not one of us. You can bring that very close. You can create good relationships there, but it is equally important to me that people feel like they're part of our team, right? And that is something that much unlike a temp agency, most people who work for a temp agency don't care about the temp agency because there are 10 in the town and they're going to go to the next one. If I burn a bridge, I burn a bridge. But because we track and grade all of our personnel as any responsible entity should, we understand who they are, why they're good, and for that reason, we like to advertise inside the plant.
On our next episode, we'll be discussing how to deploy 200 workers in 72 hours. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And to wrap up today's discussion,
Contract labor isn't a risk, it's your competitive edge.
and remember, without people, there is no production. We'll see you next time.